Your Best Manager, episode 60.
He wouldn't hesitate, and sometimes to lose a deal, rather than step in and tell you precisely what you should be doing. He was going to try to help you figure it out.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Your Best Manager podcast, featuring interviews with senior managers and leadership experts, as well as practical advice for first-time managers. And after today's show, be sure to hop over to yourbestmanager.com and check out the free management course, Fully Engaged in 10 Days, where you will learn 3 critical components to increasing employee engagement on your team. Have fun! You know, you don't have to be salesy to sell, and you don't need to be an extrovert in order to find success. This is Jamie Newman here, and I am excited to be joined by Andy Paul today. Andy, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, I'm excited to have you, Andy. Andy Paul is an author, speaker, and sales acceleration strategist. He writes and speaks on topics such as sales process, sales effectiveness, sales strategies, and sales productivity. And he also hosts a top-rated podcast, Accelerate, where he interviews the world's foremost sales minds 6 times a week. And one of the reasons I'm thrilled to chat with Andy today is because of a couple of lines on the About page of Andy's website, which reads, "I almost didn't make it past the sales training class in my first job out of college. The bosses didn't think I'd make it in sales because I wasn't salesy enough. They thought I was too introverted and analytical." And personally, I've done quite a bit of sales throughout my career so far, and I too have been accused of maybe being too analytical and I'll say not pushy enough, but hey, I figured it out. And Andy's built an entire business around this. So welcome to the show, Andy. And why don't you kick things off by taking a moment to give us an overview of your career path and just how you got to where you are today?
How much time do we have? Sort of a long, tortuous path. But yeah, I got started working for a large computer company. And actually, my first sales job was selling women's shoes at J.C. Penney's back in high school. But first professional job out of school, working for a company called Burroughs, was that time the second largest computer company in the world. And it was back in time when big tech companies had these formal training programs where they hired hundreds and hundreds of kids straight out of college and put them through the ringer with the idea that they'd weed out most of them over the course of a couple of years.
Right.
And those that were left would become sales managers. And so our training was lots of cold calls. So at that time, we were still selling these big desktop adding machines for Burroughs, and to earn our stripes, we had to go out and sell a certain amount of that before they'd train us to sell computers. Huh. And so the job was, I was in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we'd drive to a business park with one of these big desktop adding machines on my arm and my flip chart portfolio under the other, and make 30, 40, 50, 60 sales, cold calls a day.
Wow.
And it was fantastic training. And then that sort of led me then to selling computers, and did well there, President's Club, and got promoted quickly to my first management job when I was about just 23, and I had 13 salespeople working for me, some of whom were as old as 60. Wow. Sort of real interesting experience as a first management role.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember one of my first experiences. So I worked in recruiting, and I remember probably the first year, I was a 20-year-old when I was hired, but I was interviewing people that were in some cases 3 times my age, and they'd come in to interview with me, and they'd be like, "Wait, you're the person who's deciding whether or not I get hired?"
Well, yeah, I look at pictures of myself from those days, and I think, okay, well, I was selling a big system. It'd be like $250,000 for us at that time, and I remember thinking, why? I looked 15. Why did anyone ever buy from me? Still a mystery to me, I think, perhaps. But anyway, then, I worked at Burroughs, and we were doing quite well, but started getting more and more of these instances. This was a long time ago, back in the early 80s, where we were getting ready to close a big deal, and we'd show up at the customer's office, and they'd say, "Well, I just don't think we're going to be able to move forward because last night, I went to the computer store, and they turn around and there's like an Apple II on their desk, or an IBM PC, and they say these Apple II can do everything your $100,000 piece of equipment can do." And it's like, And it didn't take me too long getting beat over the head with that to think, So I left Burroughs and went to work for Apple. And that was a
Good decision.
good decision. And so that was sort of my foray into Silicon Valley and worked for Apple. And after Apple, worked for a couple startups that were focused on in the PC business. One that was the first battery-powered laptop computer, which was a spectacular failure. And then from there, I got into satellite and wireless communications and worked for, oh gosh, there were 3 or 4 startups in that space before starting my own company in 2000, which, part of what my mission at that time was had a great success working with startups, selling large, complex products, competing against really large, established companies, and sort of what I called underdog selling. And I thought this was really something that a lot of small companies could benefit from as they're looking to scale up and grow their businesses, is how to do this.
Right.
And so, yeah, I started my company in 2000, really to focus working with sort of small, as Vern Harnish calls them, scale ups, past startup stage, a little more mature company, to help them say, okay, yeah, how do we take that next step up in our growth?
Right. Yeah, I do have a question. I alluded to this earlier, but you don't have to be salesy. And as someone who you described yourself as a little bit more analytical and introverted, how did you figure it out? Because I mean, I've been there where I've been, as I said, accused of maybe not being pushy enough or not being. I mean, I can be extroverted enough and have a lot of fun, but when it comes to sales, I always felt that this is going to sound really bad because it's so obvious, but I always felt that honesty won the day versus trying to come across as, or versus the salesy personality. But like, so how did you figure that out, and how did you succeed amidst so many other, or amidst the standard of,
Sure.
I don't know, salesiness?
Well, I think part of it was learning early on, and I think maybe I just got this from my parents about being true to yourself, and integrity being a huge part of that. And I tell a story about actually when I interviewed for the job at Burroughs. Is we were selling mini computers that were for accounting applications for mid-sized companies, and so you had to know accounting and bookkeeping fairly well. And so when I was interviewing for the job, my first interview with Burroughs was quite a story. So I'm waiting in the lobby for the manager to come out and get me. And he comes out, and this was, I learned afterwards, a man of very few words, named Ray. And Ray sort of crooks his finger at me and tells me to follow him into this conference room. And so we sit down in a conference room, him on one side of the table, me on the other, and he opens up his little folio with this notepad in it. And the first words out of his mouth is he asks me an accounting question. Mm-hmm. Now, I had taken accounting in school. Actually, I'd done pretty well in accounting, but I was completely unprepared for that being the first question.
Yeah.
And I just drew a blank. And I'm sitting there. My first thought through my mind was, "Oh God, here on my first interview, and I've just completely blown it."
Yeah.
And so I said, "Look, I could try to BS you with an answer, but I know the answer to this question, but you just caught me off guard, and I really apologize. But if you let me, I'll leave here now and I'll go look up the answer. I'll call you, and maybe we could, talk about it for that point." And he closes his folio and stands up and leaves the room without saying a word. And I'm like, "Oh shoot, what have I done?" And about 5 minutes passes, and then this other guy comes into the room, slightly older, and he introduces himself. He says, "I'm Brian. I run this whole operation here." And he said, "I was just talking to Ray." And I was feeling a dread. And he says, "And Ray says he wants to hire you." That was fundamentally my interview for that job, is the fact that I refused to BS him and refused to sort of try to be salesy and just sort of bluff my way through it, got me the job. And so it's this incredible lesson early on about the power of integrity, the power of being authentic and true to yourself. And if I hadn't already known it, which I did know that, and obviously because that's what I did, that really stuck with me. And so, throughout my career, it's always been about establishing a connection with someone that's really authentic. It's authentic to me, that pays attention to to the details, what they need, what they're concerned about. And dealing with people, like I said, with honesty and integrity at all times. And it's just made a difference.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's additional profound lessons. I mean, customers and hiring managers, they want to gauge, whether it's in a cold call or in an interview, they want to gauge honesty, not necessarily just because it's the right thing to do, although it is the right thing to do. But I mean, as a manager myself, I would want to hire employees that are going to be honest with me and tell me when they don't know the answers. Because a huge frustration as a leader is when someone gives you the impression that they know what they're doing and they try and fake it, and then they end up screwing up when they should have just asked for help. And you demonstrated very quickly that you're willing to be honest. And I mean, it's the same thing with customers. I mean, a customer is going to want a sales rep or a partnership with a company that is going to tell them when they don't have all the answers. But the other side of that is, and it's amazing what happens from so few words. You said you were going to go get the answer. I mean, it wasn't just a, hey, sorry, I don't know, and give up. It's, hey, if this is important to you, I'm going to go figure it out. And it's the same with again, with management. It's like, I would love an employee who said, I don't know, let me go find out. And a customer would love a sales rep or a partner or a client who said, I don't know, I'm going to go find out, because it's solution driven. So there's so much in that little story that you shared. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you. But it was so, I mean, I was trying to sort of, continue to complete the circle is, for me, things that were really important for me for success throughout my career was really the paying attention to these small things. I mean, you might say integrity, honesty is not a small thing, but it's the basic habits you get into. And this is what I've written about in both my books, and my next book that's going to be coming out, same thing. It's the small things you do that really make a difference, whether it's selling to a customer, which is really in itself a form of leadership, right? Because you're inspiring someone to do something with you. And similarly with people that work for you, you're not directing them, you're inspiring them to come along with you, to follow you. And so I found that, it's really the small things, pay attention to the small details, the small behaviors, for a leader. And for me, it was always about, never assume that I was ever the smartest person in the room. I mean, it was sort of an interesting sort of lesson you learn is, you come up, I went to a pretty good school and they're surrounded by tons of smart people. And the first day I got there as a freshman, I was like, I thought, hey, I'm a smart kid. I'm going to this great school. And it's like, oh my God, all these people are so much smarter than I am. and it was, sort of from that point forward, it's really opened my eyes so that every situation I was in, it was pretty humbling as a kid, which is just what I needed, obviously. But from that point forward, it's like, I mean, there's always smarter people. And so, use them, right? Use them, find out what they know, what they can do, they can contribute to help, reach a better resolution. It's a problem you're trying to solve or an account you're trying to close is, get more people participating.
Love that. Work on and build habits, and it's about the small things. So good. Well, congratulations on building a successful career, Andy. And here's the big question for today's interview. When you look back on your career, who was your best manager? And maybe it wasn't a manager, so it could be a mentor, but who has had the most significant influence on your career and why?
Well, I really think there's multiple people, and so I'll sort of try to go through it somewhat quickly. But the first gentleman, Ray, who I mentioned, who interviewed me at Burroughs, was a fairly no-nonsense, had come from Kodiak, Alaska, living on this island, very no-nonsense type guy, and taught me a lesson really early on, and I've stuck with me forever. And he said, here's the thing about sales. Selling's really very simple. It's not easy, but it's really pretty simple. And I've sort of always lived by that. There's real sort of four things I boil it down to, and just wrote a post about it and in my newsletter, weekly newsletter, is a little acronym called BALD, B-A-L-D, which is, be present, meaning be focused on the customer, ask killer questions, listen without judgment, deliver value with every sales touch. And if you do that, that's really simple. Now, it's not always easy, as he said, but that is simple, and that is selling. So Ray was very influential. Another boss, John, who was perhaps the most influential in my career, and worked with him at a certain stage. And what I learned from John was he was VP of sales at the startup, and we had a lot going on. But what John mastered was the ability to know the detail of everything that was going on in the deals that his salespeople were working on. And what happened a couple times is, and this only happened several once, is he called me on a Sunday afternoon. And he said, "I want to do an account review." And, and I'm like, okay. And what became clear pretty quickly is that he knew more about what was going on in some of my accounts than I did.
Huh.
And that's not a place you want to be.
No.
And that was the last time that ever happened. But it was a great lesson. And it's just like, he forced you to get to a level of detail, thinking about what's going to be happening with these deals. What's the next step? What are you going to do on the next step that's going to help the customer get one step closer to making a decision? And really thinking about in terms of how are you creating and establishing and maintaining momentum inside these opportunities. That was really, really very decisive. And then probably the last person was the CEO I worked for at one startup, who was actually was a friend and recruited me to join the company and start a division, and was just really smart, but also was willing to let people make mistakes to help them learn.
Right.
And so he wouldn't hesitate, and sometimes to lose a deal, rather than step in and tell you precisely what you should be doing. He was going to try to help you figure it out. And that was always stuck with me as somebody that that incredibly smart, because this organization has grown tremendously. It's still in existence, huge company, and they've created this learning culture where people figure things out. They tackle complex problems, and it's not directive. It's collaborative. It's smart people working together to solve problems.
Yeah, I love that last part, because that's difficult. I mean, I've been there. I mean, I can just think of training, and a lot of training, or good training, is done through shadowing, and so you watch someone else do it, especially in sales. I remember going on the road with young salespeople, and you hear them saying something that isn't working, or you watch the customer's face and it's not working. And it's so tempting to jump in, take over, and do the job for them. But it takes a mindset of thinking about the future long term to allow someone to go through that and then coach them afterwards, because maybe you save that sale. But what did the employee really get out of that experience, versus maybe they lose that sale and then they win the next 10 because of it, right?
Well, yeah, it reminds me of a story that I interviewed a gentleman on my show yesterday, and he was talking about his name is Kevin F. Davis. He's written a book about sales management. It's a good book, and he was talking about an experience when he was a new salesperson, that he noticed that when his manager went on ride-alongs with him, his manager, when they walked into a sales call, would always take like a $50 piece back when they still existed, or a silver dollar, and fold it up in his hand and hold it in his fist while they were doing the call. And after that happened a few times, he asked the manager, "Why are you doing that?" He says, "Well, what I do is when you're in the call and you say something that makes me want to interrupt, I squeeze the coin as a reminder not to say anything." And he said, "And there's sometimes I'm squeezing it really hard." And so I thought that was a great story, just to illustrate the point is, I mean, you're there as a manager at that point, not necessarily to save the day, but to learn what's going on and observe, so you have this sort of real-time feedback. Because problem a lot of times with managers, when they try to coach the individuals, they're coaching them based on what the individual says happened, their recollection of what happened, which by science, everybody knows our recollections are notoriously inaccurate. So being there and watching is really important. Then debriefing, coaching afterwards in the real time, hey, that really helps. But interrupting, you send the message to the customer that the sales rep doesn't know what they're talking about.
Yep. It's the same. I remember someone taught me early on not to. So the way that our company worked, we had account managers who were like basically the managers, and then you had recruiters who did the recruiting. So it wasn't a 360 desk. But one of the things I was taught early on is when you introduce a recruiter to a potential client or a new client, what a lot of people did is said, "This is my recruiter." And the second that you do that, you just established your authority and you removed any expertise from the recruiter. Versus if you introduce them, said, "This is my partner and recruiting expert," and it's something
Hmm.
so subtle, but it's your job to um, add value to the people that you're with as a senior person, and as a manager in those cases, if you are coaching and training somebody, it's your job to help them look good, not take over what they're doing and demean them or devalue them. Not only from a customer's perspective, as you brought up, but from someone's own confidence. They want to feel that when you're on the road with them or when you're coaching them, you're in their corner, and and you're lifting them up and building them up, and that builds trust and confidence, right?
Yeah, well, I think that I put a little different spin on what you talked about, which is the reason that managers oftentimes would say, as this case, here's our recruiter instead of, here's my partner, is not necessarily to demean them, but it's to build themselves up in the eyes of the people they're talking to.
Yeah.
So, that's the problem I see so many leaders have is that it feels like they're trying to sort of reestablish their bona fides, and the people already know you're a VP. You don't have to, downgrade the other person, degrade the other person to make yourself look more important. We already know you're important.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so this becomes one of those habits again where word choices really become important. And in some cases, yeah, it may be slightly, unintentional. Other cases, it's just becomes sort of embedded in people to sort of say, yeah, hey, I need to put the spotlight on myself. And a leader doesn't need to do that.
Right.
I mean, people understand who you are. So your job should always be as well. How can I make my people shine in the best light possible?
Yeah, and even if people don't know who you are, who cares? I mean, it's about providing value to the customer. It's your job as a leader to do that, whether that's behind the scenes or not. So such good stuff
Hmm.
there. And I could probably talk about this for hours and hours, but we don't have time for that. So I do have another question. You had mentioned
Sure.
that your first job or your first management role, you had to manage people that were obviously older than you, in some cases
Hmm.
more experienced. And so I'm
Hmm.
wondering if you could maybe talk about some of the challenges. Was that age gap the biggest challenge you faced as a new manager, or were there other things that you faced when you started leading people for the first time?
Well, I think that the biggest challenge I had as a new leader was this feeling of loss of control.
Mm,
And someone that was a high performing individual, that was hard. I mean, I have to admit this, the first management job I had was the most stressful I think I've ever had.
hmm.
And because I couldn't control everything. And I couldn't have control how people were selling, and I was working myself to the bone, going as many call ride-alongs as I could, and talking with customers and so on. But it was sort of learning how to relinquish control that was a hard lesson, but an essential lesson that I learned that first job. And so learning that I'm only going to succeed if my people are successful. I then had to sort of reorient myself, say, okay, well, what can I do to help them succeed? And yeah, that was a learning experience because it was different for every person.
Hmm.
Some people were extremely self-directed, and they just needed to occasionally talk strategy on deals, and they were, I could let them go, and that's fine. Other people needed a lot more handholding, if you will, and so maybe it was more rudimentary training, just in the office, doing presentation skills and other things that were essential part of the job, or like I said, doing tons of ride-alongs. It really varied, and so I think that was the other thing I learned is that you know people are individuals, and you have to treat them as such. And especially as a manager, it sometimes takes more time,
Yeah.
but you have to do that. And I see this as a failing so often with new managers, and not even I won't even say necessarily just exclusively new managers, is where they want to treat everybody the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a management process. You have to conform to my process. And as a result, the people that don't conform to the process that may have a lot to contribute, they may wash out or they may not fit. And that's a problem because those same people are do that for their people they're managing. They do that same thing with customers, right? You have to fit into a niche. You have to fit
Yeah.
into this box, or we're going to treat you all the same. Well, that's really a suboptimal way of selling because, especially in business to business, everybody's unique and
Yeah.
their needs are unique and how they process information is unique and so on. So anyway, it was learning to treat people as individuals that was another key lesson I learned.
So, practically speaking, I've faced this myself, and so I'm wondering if you've got some good advice on this. But I like what you're saying, and I think it's true. But sometimes it's very hard to see if, as a manager, you're doing it because how do you know? And this is the big question: how do you know if a problem is the employee's not following direction properly, or I, as the leader, am not communicating according to what that person needs? Because I may think that I'm treating people as individuals, but I've seen it, what you're talking about, and the managers end up saying, well, that one employee isn't as good or isn't performing at a high level. So how do you know if
Sure,
it's the manager or the employee?
you don't always, right? So I've had several instances in my career. I think of three in particular where I've hired somebody to come onto a team who, in one of the three cases, I knew the person. Another case, I didn't know the person, but I knew the people that he had worked with that highly, highly, highly recommended this person. And the other one I didn't. It was just great interview, had good references, so on. In all three cases, within 30 days, it's obvious it wasn't working.
Hmm.
But we had no idea why, because these people were all proven high performers at their previous companies. And you just never know. In one case, the guy that had come from a company where I knew the people and that he had worked with and they highly recommended, yeah, I called them. They had no idea what was happening. And it
Hmm.
wasn't until, and we ended up letting him go at the end of his probation period, 90 days. We had counseled and coached and it just wasn't working. And, he went back to his old company and did extremely well. And then actually came back to the company again that I had been working for.
Yeah.
I'd since left, but he came back and was doing really well. And actually run into him a few years later. And he was having some family issues at the time and just, it's hugely distracting as you'd expect it to be. There was no way of knowing.
Right.
Right. And so we did what we could within the context of what we knew, but ultimately it didn't work out. So you'd never really know, in some cases, whether it's you or them. In other cases, I think what managers have to do is you have to ask the
Yeah.
person, right? If you really understand the individual, if you spent the time to invest in them to say, okay, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve in this job? Why are you here? What's this going to be for you in your career? How can I help you achieve those goals, right? Is then go back and have that conversation again, right? Am I helping you
Yep.
in the way that you need to be helped to achieve the goals? I mean, do a little rating system, right? It's in essence what you're doing. You're asking for your rating. And then also if that's not satisfactory, then ask your own boss. Hey, I'm having this issue with this person. Is it me? I mean, are you getting feedback from other people that perhaps there's something I should be working on? And getting other people's perspectives then become pretty important. You have to feel open enough and confident enough to do that.
Yeah.
But if you are a leader, if you are confident in your abilities, then hey, you want that feedback. That's going to make you better. You don't want to be afraid of it. You want to hear it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you realize this, but it goes exactly with what you're saying before. You want to be present, ask killer questions, listen without judgment, and deliver value in every interaction.
Yeah.
And that goes for leadership just as much as sales, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a great book about coaching, and I really, every manager should actually. I recommend now every manager should buy this book and read it. Called The Coaching Habit, written by a gentleman from Toronto
Hmm.
named Michael Bungay Stanier,
Yes, yeah,
and fantastic book. And it's short, easy to get through, but it's really, you look at that book and say, okay, well, yeah, it's a coaching book, but it's really a sales book, and it's really sort of a relationship book. I mean, it's you take the lessons from it and apply it in so many different dimensions. And I think you do that. The basics for sales work for relationships, work for coaching, work for managing, work for leading.
Yeah, love it. We're talking way too much, and I'll say that that's my fault more than yours. But I've got two last questions for you. And the
Sure.
first one's exactly related to what you were just talking about. I want to make this a little bit practical for the person listening today they're not in sales, and they think of sales as what salespeople do, and they're a manager, a leader, but hey, I don't like it. I'm not salesy, and I don't need sales. And so I wonder if you can give some advice about
Everybody needs
self-development.
sales.
Yeah.
Everybody needs sales. I mean, if people have any doubt about it, they should read Dan Pink's book, To Sell is Human, which, the research shows that 3/4 of white collar workers in the United States, and we'll assume Canada, North America, consider influencing others as part of their responsibilities, part of their job.
Mm-hmm.
So, hey, we're all in sales. We all have the need to influence others. And so, yeah, I wouldn't want to put a label on it sales. It's just say, hey, we need to influence others. We need to work through others. These lessons we're talking about are common to all that.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that was exactly what I was looking for. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. I'm glad you didn't give a different answer, because that would have been awkward. But I mean, everybody, if you are a leader or a manager, and you alluded to this earlier, it's your job to convince or to sell your employees into following you. You don't have necessarily a product or a service, but everything that you do is branding yourself. And it's not, I mean, sales sounds cold. And so I think you did a good job of saying it's about influence. And it's about providing value to your customers. And as a leader, your customers in many cases are also your employees. And that's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. So,
but to follow that up and because you asked a question about professional development, personal development, is you have to read and you have to explore what's out there. I mean, I came up in the world through tech startups, and now for 17 years of my own company, where we don't have formal training programs. We never really did, other than the first company I worked for ages and ages ago. So, but there's this world of books out there. There's now a world of books and podcasts and books on tape and webinars. There's just, you have to devote some portion of your time, your own time. It'd be nice if companies gave you the time, but not all companies are enlightened. They don't do that. So you have to commit to say, look, I'm going to turn off the TV. I'm not going to watch this episode of The Bachelor. I'm not going to watch this season of The Bachelor. And I'm going to spend an hour every Monday night after dinner listening to a podcast. Or, if I'm at the gym, I'm going to listen to a podcast. Or I'm going to read a book tonight. And I'm going to work through a book. We're going to read a book a month. And just like if you commit yourself to read a book a month, which is maybe 20 minutes a day. So not even, you could still watch The Bachelor if you wanted. At the end of a year, you've read 12 things from smart people, hopefully, that add to your knowledge.
Yep.
And if you do that over a 10-year period, that's 120 books. I mean, how many of your peers have read 120 books about your business and your profession during that period of time? I guarantee very few. You start setting yourself apart in a very meaningful way and preparing yourself for what's coming, what's next in your career.
Yep. I mean, if you... I like to say that there's three really important questions that every leader needs to ask. And the first one is, what do you want? And if you want to be someone of influence, if you want to be a successful leader, your next question is, what's in your way? And then the final question is, what are you going to do about it? And you have to make decisions. If you need to work on something, you need to pick up a book, or you need to listen to a podcast, or you need to go take a course so that you can work on improving in the areas that are going to make you successful. So some great advice there. And we're going to move on to the final question for today's interview.
Drum roll.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's going on in your world? What's exciting? What's happening with Andy Paul today?
Oh, lots going on. And one of the big things for me is my podcast. And my podcast called Accelerate with Andy Paul. And we just got recognized in Inc. magazine as one of the 12 leadership podcasts to listen to, which was quite an honor.
Yeah, congratulations.
But thank you. And so we have, as you'd mentioned, we have a 6-day-a-week podcast that it's sales focused to some degree, sales oriented, but we interview a lot of people about leadership, management. We have a lot of marketing episodes as well. They've actually some of our more popular episodes are about marketing issues. but everything's sort of a little bit with a sales lens, right? How do we accelerate revenue growth with the tools that we're learning? And that selfishly has been great because I learned so much. So we've done, as of today when we're recording this, 420 episodes.
Wow.
And I'm 420 people smarter than I was when I started. And so for me, it's I said selfishly, I've probably gained as much or as more as my audience in doing it, but it's a lot of fun, and we're delivering a lot of value to people and growing a big audience, which we're really, really grateful for. So I encourage people to come check that out, and you can find that iTunes, Stitcher, wherever. And we're gonna have some new things coming out here pretty quickly associated with the podcast that I think people will find exciting. So that's sort of the big thing in our world.
Nice. Did you mention that you've got a new book coming out too?
Well, I'm just at the beginning stages of writing it, so not sure when it's going to show up, but hopefully early 2018. It'll sort of depend on the publisher, but it's going to be focused on what are these fundamental behaviors, habits that we all need to have to successfully influence others, whether it's in sales or life or whatever.
Very cool. Well, for everyone listening, you need to go start following Andy so that when that book gets ready for release, you are aware of it. And maybe I'll have to invite you back on to chat about it.
I'd love to do it. So if people want to follow me on Twitter, and I'm glad you reminded me, it's at 0 Time Selling. 0 Time Selling was the name of my first book. And follow me on LinkedIn, Andy Paul, also 0 Time Selling there.
Awesome. I was just going to ask, how can we connect? And so you got your website, andypaul.com, 0timeselling.com as well?
0 times. Well, it goes to andypaul.com. And if somebody wants to talk, send me an email at andy@zerotimeselling.com. That's all one word, 0 Time Selling. Or just do it the old fashioned way. Pick up the phone and call me, 619-980-4002.
Fantastic. And I love that you brought up that that's old fashioned. It shouldn't be, right? But so many of us are terrified of that phone.
Let's all be human. Let's talk to people. So be human, pick up the phone, give me a call. It's
funny. As a total side note, but as a salesperson learning how to cold call, and even after I've been cold calling for 8 years, there were still times where I was like, I don't want this person to pick up the phone. I'm dialing it, but like, don't pick up, voicemail.
We all have been there. Believe me, we all have been there.
Oh, that's so funny. Anyway, well, thank you so much for your time today, Andy. I'll put all those links and everything we've talked about, as well as that book you mentioned, The Coaching Habit. I'll put that all in the show notes, which are super easy to find. You can just go to yourbestmanager.com and click on the magnifying glass in the top right corner, type in Andy or Paul. Well, both will actually pop up the show from today.
Well, that's a great thing about having two first names is they work very well.
Yeah, but how many people call you Paul? It's got to happen, right?
About 15%, I think.
That's not bad. That's not bad. I would have expected it to be actually worse than that, because the number of times that I've gotten called Newman, and
well, you can thank Seinfeld for that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. There were probably people who intentionally called me Newman. Yeah. Exactly. Anyway, that brought up some great
Jamie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for being here, and managers listening. I'm not sure if you're traveling to or from work, getting a workout in, or simply taking some time to relax and listen today, but I hope that you've been encouraged and inspired from our conversation with Andy Paul. And Andy, thanks for sharing some of your story with the next generation of leaders.
Well, thank you very much.
And we'll talk soon. All right, everyone, that does it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Now hop over to yourbestmanager.com and take advantage of the free tools, resources, and training which I've created exclusively for you, the next generation of leaders. Oh, and have fun.